Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the People's Mirror. It seems that Kindiki's and Mudavadi's political fate is already sealed ahead of 2027. In this episode, we want to recap a little bit of what has happened that now confirms that their political fate seems sealed. But other than that, we'll also take a look at what happened with certain politicians who are now gaining so much confidence to actually rise into their political career, irrespective of the fear and hierarchy that has existed before. If you're joining the People's Mirror for the first time, please hit the subscribe button so that this can be your platform of political commentatorship. So let's begin. Mudavadi recently was giving a speech at Jiron's burial. And one of the things that is now trending away from the speech itself was the fact that by the time Mudavadi was giving this speech, the rest of the congregants and the listeners and the audience, whatever term you can call the people who came to mourn Cyrus Jirongo and also came to listen to political statements, were packing and leaving. And so there is a footage of not only the people packing and leaving, but Mudavadi was speaking and the media houses themselves were also packing and leaving. Now, let us not put much interpretation to this more than what it's not, but this is what it seems to be. One, perhaps by the time Mudavadi was speaking in terms of hierarchy, it was already so late in time that the people had listened to other politicians and time was so much spent the way Mudavadi himself was saying. And so the people opted to leave and not listen to the rest of the political statements were being made. Or two, Mudavadi is losing his influence from his own backyard, because perhaps if this was Raila Odinga, for example, in his days, and there was a hierarchy of speeches that were being made, and all the speeches had been made, would have the media houses walked away and the people walked away while Raila is making that statement? Now, those are two spectrums to look at it from. One, time was so much spent, and Honorable Mudavadi's speech was, stationed somewhere in the program that was late, and so by the time his time was coming to come to the podium, it was already late, and people, were going back home. The media houses were trying to get back to Nairobi or the places where they had come from, and so they had to walk away when Musalia Mudavadi was making the speech. Or Musalia Mudavadi's influence in the ground has now gone or diminished to the level that the people no longer see the need to wait and listen to his statements anymore. The people no longer see the weight of his political muscle to sit there and listen to whatever he has to say when he says it. Now, because the people walked away while Mudavadi was making his speeches, and in the media houses also tried to walk away while Mudavadi was giving his speeches, we're going to give Mudavadi some 5 minutes here at the People's Mirror to recap what really did he say and what is his position now and moving forward into the 2027 political arrangements, which is the major talk in the Kenyan political landscape right now. So Mudavadi wants everything in Jirongo's death to be laid bare. He says that if there is foul play, then the people to be targeted, and if there is no foul play, then the will of God to actually prevail. So he was picking part of his speech from where major politicians, lawyer politicians had stopped, and so it would only have been fair that Mudavadi follows in that path, because if Mudavadi stood up and spoke like President Uhuru Kenyatta did, without looking or questioning the demise of Jirongo or casting doubt on whether or not it was a natural death, then of course the lawyer community that lost Jirongo and that is now putting aspersions around left, right and center around anyone who might have been a perpetrator on what they term as the death of Jirongo would have landed on Mudavadi. And so it is very sensitive and very smart of the CS and the prime CS to actually have gone through that route, where he said that he wants everything around Jirongo's death laid bare, so that if there is foul play, then the actors of that foul play be targeted, and if there is no foul play, then God's will prevail. Now, speaking on behalf of government, which Mudavadi said he was speaking on behalf, Musalia promised that he would leave no stone unturned, and there will be no stone that will be left unturned. You see, Musalia saying that he will leave no stone unturned and speaking on behalf of government shortly after Orengo has said that police are lying, and Sifuna stormed saying that hatuwezi pata haki katika hii serikali ya Ruto, was actually just, of course, making a saving face, or rather, that is the word I was looking for, saving face for the current regime in his speech. And so in his statement, he was saying that as the government, irrespective irrespective of all these allegations that are being made around Jirongo's death and all these aspersions that are being cast around Jirongo's death, he was promising that he will make it an intentional move to leave no stone unturned until the answers around the death of Cyrus Jirongo, which is now finding its last days in the Kenyan political and news reporting channels, is answered, and all the questions around it, of course, answered. He talked to what Uhuru had said, that there exist 93 parties right now, and the government will not hinder the registration of others. Of course, Mudavadi was directly attacked on this particular strengthening democracy issues when Orengo himself said that Mudavadi, allowed his party ANC to be absorbed by the UDA party. And so the statements that we have detailed in the other episode around the absorption of political parties vis-a-vis strengthening democracies of political parties as one of the top conversations that are going on in the Kenyan political scene right now also did not escape the mind of Musalia Mudavadi when he took it to that podium. Irrespective of the fact that the people in the media houses were walking away, he still kept to it and said very categorically that the government will not hinder registration of new political parties, and the 93 or thereabout that are in the country right now will also be given sufficient time to actually thrive. But questions have been raised about the bottlenecks that are created by the registrar of political parties. One of the conditions you have to meet while registering a political party is that you need to have branches. Now, this particular branches around the country is always something that is very, very hard to attain and to create, considering the financial muscle of someone that would want to register a new political party just ahead of an election. And so this particular bottlenecks exist in law, and so Mudavadi says that if there is anything the government will not do, it is interfering with the registration of political parties, so that if the bottlenecks exist, then they exist as a result of law, and if they are not there, then they are not there not as a result of the actions of the politicians in government currently. So he defended that the Kenyan political space will still be open to multi-party democracy, defending the move right now of President William Ruto to merge the UDA party and the ODM party, and of course the ANC party and such like parties, as coalition moves which are actually allowed within the spectrum of this particular legal space, this particular political space, where Mudavadi says that previously they had formed coalition, including Azimio coalition, and coalitions find room within the Kenyan political party space, but killing political parties and hindering registration of more political parties, he said, was not in any way intention of the government that he was speaking on behalf. So Mudavadi kept it that they shall defend democracy. It seemed like Mudavadi was speaking in isolation of actually the actual practice of what is going on, because forming coalition is not wrong, but merging his party with other political parties, yet also standing at the podium to defend political parties, existing, without interference with other political parties, seemed that Mudavadi had to say what he had to say, even if he did not believe in it. So it was so bad that he was speaking. The technical team, you can take a look at those particular media houses that captured the entire speech on video, that while he was speaking, the technical team was parking and actually leaving behind him. For someone who is a prime CS level of Mudavadi, we hoped that while he was speaking, everything, including the media houses, even if the people were walking away, because you can't control the people, would have remained intact to cover what he was saying, because he was the lead person that was sent by President William Ruto. So it seemed like people boycotted President William Ruto's speech and President William Ruto's messenger, because the person that read President William Ruto's condolence speech was, of course, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi. So we could say this was because time was much spent, but also, as I said in the beginning, this could also be a reflection of the ground politics and influence in this area, shifting from the Mudavadi or Paranya Wetangula likes to the Natembeya likes. Now, Mudavadi's political position right now is that if he consolidates the blockade, that is the Luhya nation, and they vote as a bloc in 2027 presidential election, because this is the second populist voting bloc in the country, then he will help secure Ruto's second term. And the only reason why people like Musalia Mudavadi, Waiguru and Kindiki would want a region to vote as a bloc in 2027 and secure the win for President William Ruto is because of their side vested interest of becoming the number 2 in that particular position should they secure that win. Now it seems that if the community that expects, or rather the president, or rather the person that you are in arrangement expects you to deliver to the table, walks away when you're speaking, and if that's the community that now has tried to show very visibly to distance themselves from you and call for another Luya unity ahead of 2027 elections, then the political aspirations and dreams of Mudavadi seems to be cut short. But then that would only be an analysis of someone who does not understand the history of how Mudavadi got into politics, and how Mudavadi's father himself is the person that introduced Moi to the politics of this nation. And as a result of Mudavadi's father believing in Moi and having served in the previous government, Mudavadi found himself in this particular rotational basis because of his founding father's position. So others still believe that Mudavadi himself as an individual is a political powerhouse that might not find himself missing in any arrangement of government, irrespective of whether or not the Luya voters are behind him. But Mudavadi aside as an individual interest, the question is, will a person hold or host Mudavadi in their political camp if they know very, very well that Mudavadi will not deliver any of the Luya votes, or the presence of Mudavadi in their camp will affect the presence of other Luya votes in joining that particular camp? So the fate of Mudavadi, who is now the closest AD or the closest handman to President William Ruto in the current trips that they have been taking together, that can actually be assumed to be so close to President William Ruto like a deputy president, is now being decided ahead of 2027, that if the region that he comes from does not support him and would walk away while he's making speeches, then it seems like walking into 2027, his goose is already cooked. And the other individual who is going to suffer in this very fate, people are saying in the political discussions, both physically and in the online space, will be Kindiki Kithure. Now the reason why people believe that Honorable Professor Kindiki might suffer the cut come 2027 is first because how he came into power, and two, because of the voter bloc that supports him. First, let's start with how he came into power. Of course, Kindiki was not voted in alongside President William Ruto when voting was taking place, and that is something that cannot be ignored. He was not the will of the people at the very ballot stage. The will of the people happens that when a presidential candidate declares his presidential bid, then he comes with the presidential deputy presidential aspirant, and so the election happens that the person that is voted as a president is voted alongside his deputy president. But Kindiki was not in that ballot in 2022, and so as a result of the disagreements between the current president and his first voted deputy president, the office of the deputy president became vacant, and in a process that did not follow the ordinary legal processes, Kindiki became the deputy president. Now that's a political seat, and sometimes it can follow a political way independent of a legal process of becoming a deputy president. But Kindiki is currently serving as the deputy president. Now his position as a deputy president has had fights from within his own community, where a section of his community believes that Kindiki is a living betrayal of a brother who is celebrating a death of another brother politically, that replacing Rigathi Gachagua with Kindiki was setting Kindiki up against his own community to lose his own influence and support from his community. And so for some time, people rode on that particular belief that Kindiki was not loved by his people, and Kindiki was only serving on the grave of a brother that had been assassinated. And so people believe that sympathizers and sympathy votes would really go to Kindiki compared to Gachagua, or would rather really go to Gachagua compared to Kindiki, pardon me. Then we face the by-elections that were just concluded in Beira North, and they go the way they go, and Kindiki uses that as a ground to now solidify his kingpin of the Mount Kenya area, and also solidify the ground that he is a justified leader that the people love, even if others are saying that he was not elected, and that is the truth, alongside President William Ruto in the ballot. Now, that aside, the by-elections already, received. The influence of the UDA in the area increased. The influence of Rigathi Gachagua interfered with. The introduction of the likes of Waiguru done so that this particular area can be neutralized politically ahead of 2027. But something lingers and remains. What will come of Kindiki out of this entire arrangement? And people have said that if you compare the voting block of Kindiki, being the area that Kindiki commands his votes from, which is not entirely the Mount Kenya region, but a section of it that might substantively divide the Mount Kenya votes, and you compare it to where Mudavadi comes from and what he commands, and you compare it to where Duale comes from and what he commands, and you compare it to where Joho comes from and what he commands, and you compare it, of course, to where Wanga, that now conversations are being had, Uruburu comes from in the ODM branch, and the voter they command, then Kindiki does not score very well in that particular comparison. And so politics being a game of numbers ahead of 2027, now people believe that Kithure Kindiki's political fate might just have been decided as an interplay guy that was introduced to actually solidify and pacify a community for a period of 3 years and be disposed come 2027 because he does not have the political muscle and numbers to gear that community behind him in 2027. So just like we witnessed ahead of 2022 elections, where there were tensions between the president and the deputy president a few days and a few months ahead of the major elections, others have even predicted that that might be the repeat between now and 2027, when Kindiki will be serving in his office, but decisions around him will be clearly showing that in that particular office he might not be retained come 2027. But critics and supporters of the UDA party, including Senator Chirigai, had previously made it categorically clear that the position of Kindiki and President Ruto are not to be contested come 2027, and any other person entering into this union right now needs to enter in this union knowing very well that the position of Kindiki and President William Ruto are not to be discussed in 2027. Others have even seen it as a very clean slate for Professor Kindiki Kithure to actually not be in the 2027 ballot. That way he will have been a politician who have risen all the way to the position of the deputy president without losing an election. Now these critics believe that if Kindiki's name goes alongside President William Ruto's name in the ballot in 2027, then Kindiki will lose that election. So these decisions are for and against Kindiki. Politically, it seems that if Kindiki stays into the 2027 and beyond, then his dream of 4 term will start to come true, where he will serve 2 under President William Ruto and negotiate for power positions of the presidency in 2032. But if Kindiki is ousted in 2027 and another person introduced for that particular seat also still plays in favor of Kindiki as a presidential as a deputy president who never lost any election with any presidency, because he never actually went into any election with any president. However, now the decisions of Wanga coming into the table, and this decision being heightened by the ODM party, who feel like a block as the ODM party will render Ruto a win quickly, rather than a region like Kindiki's that will still have to be consolidated ahead of 2027. Believe that this is the end of Kindiki's vice presidency and, of course, deputy presidency, and Kindiki's hope and politics ahead of presidency right now, if the decision is to be made that Wanga becomes the number 2 instead of Kindiki. Now, the political fate of Mudavadi and the political fate of Kindiki are currently hanging on that thread ahead of the 2027 major polls, as we wait to see what the government right now will do when they're making their political decisions within the year and next year, vis-a-vis who will become the running mate of President William Ruto into the next major elections. I wanted to briefly also just talk about statements that were made by MP Kwamboka that blamed mentees of Jirongo who forgot Jirongo raised them, blaming them for not attending the burial of Jirongo, and also saying that had they been there for Cyrus Jirongo, then Jirongo would have been alive. Of course, Kwamboka maintains that he was also one of the mentees of Jirongo, and of course that Jirongo was killed. On later just reporting on his statement, so Kwamboka requested President Ruto to provide information on who killed Jirongo, and then he called lawyers currently in government to eat and keep quiet out of 2027 game plan, saying that it's table manners to eat and have your mouth shut. So Kambaka calls for Luya unity and says that Luyas must and should provide a presidential candidate in the 2027 and should not wait for 2032. He told them not to think when they are eating, and of course that they are eating with lawyers, saying that when 3 or 4 people are in position of power, then that should not be interpreted for a community being in position of power. The statements of Mr. Kwamboka, the MP, just narrowed the statements of Orengo when it comes to how communities and local tribes need to view the whole idea of power, not being dishing out certain CS officials to their tribe mates, but considering the impact that the actual citizen is feeling as a result of their involvement in government. MP Kwamboka now says that the roads in Luya land, when Ruto comes, are often budgeted to in just 100 millions, but if you go to the roads in Western, he says they are budgeted for in billions. And so he told President Uhuru Kenyatta that since he left them the roads that they did, they have not received any new roads from this regime. While still attacking the lawyers in government, the crowd electrifying member of parliament confirmed to President Uhuru that there is no road, of course, just as I have said, that has been created by President William Ruto in Luya land, irrespective of him being celebrated as an individual that promotes infrastructure in the country, saying that the only roads that the Luya people still have are the roads that President Uhuru himself left them with. He told Wetangula in Mudavadi to eat, of course, while obeying table manners, to eat with their mouth shut and not to eat thinking that they are eating with the Luya people together. So ladies and gentlemen, that's just the recap of what has come out of the fate of Kindiki, Mudavadi, and of course that is still coming out of younger members of parliament who are now bold enough to tell Mudavadi in his face and Wetangula while they are sitting there that the Luya people are not rallying behind them in 2027, calling upon those two leaders, if they are eating at all in the current government, to eat while closing their mouths as a way of table manners. 2026 has just begun, 2 days in it, and the Kenyan political scene is very active. Here at the People's Mirror, we make it our obligation every hour, every time of the day to recap what happens in the Kenyan political scene as it happens for your consumption. So if this is your first time with our channel, please hit the subscribe button and stay until our next episode.